Welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem. Let's begin where we can't escape. Let's begin with Logos.
Now, I would say that this openness, this being in the world, this referring to the world, to objects in the world, what I would like to call self-transcendence, this is disappearing as soon as you project a human being into a lower dimension than its own dimension.
Point of the V goes up to the nuclear explosion that created it.
Tell me this, Dr. Oppenheimer. Do you ever become frightened at what you're finding out here in this area that can't be measured in either time or space?
You see, that's a real point.
Do not be afraid. Open your hearts, open up your hearts.
Open up your hearts to Athens and Jerusalem, the infants of our culture, united, independent, polarized, and even bloody. Athens, the cradle of wisdom and rationality. Jerusalem, the cradle of faith and spirituality. In this podcast, we look at reunion. Could reason be more than modern secular skepticism? And could spirituality be more than belief? So welcome to another episode of Athens and Jerusalem, and we are here together, all three of us, Stephen and Cameron, and me, Knut Ove. So this episode we'll try to say a little bit about the connection between religious or life view and war and environment. Is there a connection? What thoughts do you, Cameron, have on the topic?
Well, I have. I think I would like to start with really some questions, because I wonder, how do we face the world situation as it is today? Because what science is obviously telling us is that we are in very difficult situation, so to say, or even a catastrophic one, with things that are happening to our planet physically in terms of climate change. And then, of course, our news media show us things like war going on. I mean, there's now war in Europe for some time, something that was rather unexpected. But there are, of course, other wars and other similar situations going on in other parts of the world that don't get that kind of media coverage. There's great economic crisis building up. And my question is, like, how do we people deal with that? And it seems to me, when I look at most people around me, that they somehow manage to ignore it. I don't know if that is a conscious or unconscious, but I mean, people just sort of go on living their lives as they would always do, as if nothing really is happening. And I don't know if it's because we think that things are going to continue, we hope things are going to continue as they are, and that these are just sort of small dislocations, so to say. But I think that the question is, I mean, sooner or later, these things are really going to hit us hard. And I think that, to me, the question is, so what are we going to do then? And especially us in countries where things have been quite stable and comfortable for most of the population for a long time. We're not used to, we don't even have any kind of resilience. So what's going to, and I think these are important issues, both from a point of view of society, but especially from the point of view of education. Like, how do schools prepare, or do they prepare the young generation for an age of quite sort of violent transitions? I'm reminded of what the Italian, I'm sure you're familiar with Antonio Gramsci, the Italian philosopher or thinker, and this well-known quote from him, where he says that the old world is dying and a new world is in the process of being born. It is the time for monsters. And I think it's this predicament. I mean, how do we face this? And what gives us hope? What gives us a direction, or some idea of how to act in this situation, other than just ignore it. And so I think these are some of the questions that sort of go through my mind at this point.
Could I just comment on it before you, Stephen, go on? I think there's in education, I've seen a lot of work be done to make the children become more aware of the situation and more aware of the problems. And I even seen the children actually trying to believe that they are the one who ought to save the world, and they are, if they don't do all the different things that they are told to do, then the world is gonna become a monster or whatever. And I think that they're like carrying a very heavy burden on their shoulders without really understanding how to deal with such big problems. And it's in the Norwegian school system, there's a lot of talk about environment and the problems. But so in my opinion, I think we should be very there's a difference between what one person can do and what we have to do on the political level. And I think there is no way that there's going to be any changes if we are not changing something in the political level. And also, I think if we actually should make like say that we have to, from one generation to another, we have to lower our way of living. We have to actually stop producing and consuming as much as we do. Then I think we have to start from when we are born. That means that we have to actually to the next generation. We are not. We can't give them as much comfort as they have if we think they should stop having the comfort, because it's very difficult for us to say that from one day to another, I'm going to stop having the comfort I have of making the footprint I do on the earth. And I think that's one of the reasons. I think that's why that people don't really, they go on live as they do without actually. It's not. I don't think really it's possible to change our habits in the way we need without actually starting from when we are born.
I completely agree with that. Over the last few centuries, the arc of civilization and progress, the industrialization of society has increased our consumption and exploitation of the environment, which was, okay for say a few centuries. We were able to get away with it until this generation, where we've suddenly abruptly run up against the edge of the resources of the planet, and we're now at a point where we're seeing the effect of this unrestrained consumption in the climate in very measurable ways. And we of course should have seen this coming a long time ago, but it seems to be human nature that our center of gravity is on our own selves and our own self-interest, and our default setting is to consider what's good for us and maybe our family and those with whom we're immediately in contact with. But what is so desperately needed today is to expand that circle of regard beyond our own immediate self-interest and those that we immediately know and love and care about, and allow that circle of regard to expand so that it embraces the entire planet, not just humanity on the entire planet, but everything on the entire planet, realizing that everything is an interconnected system, both us and everyone else, including people on the other side of the planet, as well as us and all of the life on the planet and all of the inanimate things on the planet, like the oceans and the atmosphere and so forth. It's almost as though we have a default setting of willful blindness about this. And that's, I think, where the Jerusalem piece comes in. that although religion as it has been institutionally expressed over the centuries can be a tool for intensifying this tribalism, this sense of inward directedness. Although religion can be a tool for intense human suffering and war and so forth, I would argue that religion in its essence is the solution here. Even though religion as it has been socially expressed may or may not be part of the problem or part of the solution, I think religion in its essence is the solution. And I think that's really in two dimensions. The first is that religion shows us that everything is connected. And that's what allows us to expand this circle of regard outward to embrace the entire planet. And that connectedness that religion tells us is something that gives sacredness to everything. That everything shares a spark of the divine within it. Both, humans, obviously, and we talk about the human soul or spirit, but also every living thing, and beyond that, every atom of existence is a locus for the shining forth of names and attributes of the divine. Is one way that religion teaches us to sacralize our environment. And the second thing that religion tells us that Jerusalem tells us that can help us to solve these tremendous problems of the present day is that it tells us that the movement of things, the movement of history, things on a large scale, is not random, but ultimately there's a purpose or direction to things. There's a direction to life. We can talk about that in different kind of narrative frameworks. One way we can talk about it is we're born into a material world, and the direction is that we become spiritual. We acquire spiritual attributes. We're in this world below. We want to get to heaven. That's one way to think about this narrative of movement that underlies the cosmos. But another way to think about this narrative of movement or progress is that the universe writ large is in a process of waking up, and we're a part of that. Consciousness is the ultimate source and goal of things, and we're part of that stream of consciousness, which we can think of as, in terms of the oneness of all things, as an element of the divine logos, the mind that is both the product of evolution on the planet, but also is the source of all existence.
So what you say is that from when we are born, we have to, in a way, learn this, or to be in the world in a way that we actually understand and feel and have the faith in this experience. Then maybe we could actually be in the world in a more, I think, because it has something to do with our relation with the world, the human relation with the way we are being in the world. And of course it is in many ways we think we can control everything, and even what is uncontrollable we try to control. And also he says that the more we try to control what is uncontrollable, it actually becomes more and more uncontrollable. And that's an interesting way of seeing the progress of our life. But so I think that's important. I think also that this idea about progress, where does this come from? Because it hasn't always been there. It came in and it started, I think, and quoting Albert Schweitzer, he says that this idea about progress was an ethical idea. It has to do something with to become more and more human, to become more and more ethical. But then in one moment in our in history, we splitted the ethical part of our life with truth or with knowledge, and in many ways progress was understood as something to do with knowledge, and mostly knowledge that had to do with control, knowledge to control the world. And then we stop to have the ethical, and I think that what you're talking about, Stephen, is very much to bring both, to connect the ethical and the knowledge part of our way of thinking.
Yeah, that's I think exactly right. They say that in philosophy you can't derive an ought from an is. They say you can't proceed from a description of the world in a factual sense and derive from that a moral, any kind of moral or system of morality. But I'm not sure I completely agree with that. And I think this idea of progress is a great potential counterexample to that claim that you can't derive an ought from an is. And the way I think it's a counterexample is because if we take it as a fact that movement writ large is not entirely random, but that there is a thread of progress, of development, of ascent, of, let's say, waking up, that runs through the cosmos and it runs through human history. If we take that as a fact, then doesn't that have implications in the moral sphere? Doesn't that have implications for what the good life ought to consist? For example, if there is no direction in the universe, if any choice of action is fundamentally the same as any other choice of action, then we may end up with a kind of morality in which each person basically gets to choose for themselves what the ultimate purpose of things is. And while I don't want to take the opposite extreme, that everything is pre-programmed and we don't have any kind of individual freedom, I tend to lean in the opposite direction, that instead of that there is a directionality to things that helps determine what we ought to do in any given circumstance. So, for example, love is better than hate. Is this a factual statement or is this a moral statement that we can't derive from a set of facts? We can say love is wiser than hate and just stop there, and maybe that's all we need. Or maybe, given that the universe is in the state of waking up, given that the direction of things is in the direction of greater complexity on the physical level, and it's in the direction of greater aggregations of things working together to unlock higher degrees of potentiality, as we see in human evolution and we see in cultural evolution. If that's the direction of things, then love is better than hate becomes, I think, more of a fact than simply a moral declaration, because love brings things together and hate divides and separates. So love then becomes something which is aligned with the facts of the universe as we take them. I don't know what you think about that.
I agree, and I think also, maybe Cameron, would you say something?
No, go ahead. I'll come in after you.
Because this difference between is and ought, that's not as easy, and I think your point proves how difficult it is, because we could talk about moral facts and we could also talk about scientific oughts. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of knowledge that has to do with control is knowledge that are supposed to have some kind of practical rationality. It should help human in different ways. Like you shouldn't drink coffee because this or that, or you shouldn't, whatever we say, and in especially in educational science, there's a lot of science that are supposed to tell the teacher what to do, and this kind of knowledge becomes moralistic because it tells you what you ought to do. But it often doesn't remember that we also have an ethical facts, what is actually good to do. So we have to distinguish between these what is and what ought and what is actually good. But we shouldn't, in some way or another, I think we should always have the ethical standard as the end, like the aim of whatever we do. Cameron?
Yeah, I mean, a few thoughts in response to the very interesting ideas that you have both brought up. I think, first of all, I mean, Stephen was talking about Jerusalem being the answer, and I think my take on that is that the disappearance of Jerusalem in almost any form, especially in the Western world, and understandably so, has created a void in people's lives that is being filled up with material consumption and comfort. I mean, Marx talks about how religion is an opiate to people, and that definitely can happen. But I think what has now happened in certain parts of the world is that materialism and money and comfort and pleasure have become the opiate of people, because people have no real meaning and purpose in their lives. So the thing is that, you know, what gives us the kick or a desire to live from one day to the other, and this is why, and you know, just like any kind of drug, the problem with drugs is that, you know, you take a shot of some drug or whatever it is, a pill or something, and for a while everything is fine, but then when the effect goes away, then you have to take another one, and usually a stronger one. I think this is exactly how consumerism works, because, you know, you buy one thing and then you're happy for 3 weeks, and then the effect waits, and then you need to buy something else. So I think that it's not so much, I mean, but just by taking things away from people, and as you were saying, Kundove, also earlier on, that you know, just by starting to live a simpler life, it really doesn't, I think, address, although that is definitely perhaps what we need to do, but it doesn't really address, I think, the core of the issue is that what is it that we actually live for? Now, this lack of purpose and meaning is today seen very clearly, I think, reflected in the lives of young people in Europe. The most recent statistics show that young people everywhere in Europe, at least, and I suspect this can be even more global, but at least everyone in Europe are feeling mentally less and less balanced and happy. There's a huge decrease in the mental well-being of young people. And Sweden, I think, is the leading country in that sort of downhill. Now, as actually a Finnish psychiatrist very wisely said, the response to this should not be trying to give young people therapy, because it's not essentially just some sort of a superficial psychological problem. It is a much deeper social and existential problem where young people do not see a meaningful life or a meaningful future or hope for something in the future. And so that's why I think that if we don't address this existential aspect, we don't have really a future. I mean, we're gonna lose our young generation in many senses, and we are not going to be able to combat, as it were, these forces that are ruining our societies and our even our nature. So in that sense, I think, yes, I completely agree with Stephen that we need some form of Jerusalem to come into the picture, and I think now the other thought that I would like to just briefly share is that I think the reason why postmodernism is so much against any grand narratives and the idea of some sort of a teleological view to life is because these have been traditionally misused in horrible ways. in people, forcing destructive ideologies on others in the name of God or necessity or common good or whatever. So I think, again, like many times in life, the baby has been thrown out with the bathwater, and I think that we need to somehow rescue the baby here, because I think there can be grand narratives that are not of the kind that we are used to. So that's and finally, yes, about this issue of starting from birth. I have a very wise friend here in Sweden, and he often, like, asks people, did you have the best possible parents? And most people say, well, not really. I mean, our parents were nice, but they weren't really ideal. And he says, yeah, this is the problem. We don't get to choose our parents. So we always can blame our parents that, like, we are not really doing things as we should because our parents didn't treat us the way they should have. But so the question becomes, where does this, I mean, this is a bit of a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? I mean, where does this, because I think we cannot sort of reset humanity at some point and say, okay, like Thursday the 17th at 6 a.m. Swedish time, every child is going to be, so somehow I think the question is, and so with this friend of mine, we were at one point thinking about the concept of the first generation school. And the idea was, like, at some point there has to be a generation who says, okay, the bucket stops here. Now we're going to turn the page and start doing things differently. And I think that it's not going to be everybody in a generation, but I think the question is, who are those teachers and who are those students who want to lead this movement and start saying, doesn't matter what the past generations did, doesn't matter who our parents were, with us, there's going to be a new page. And I think this is great invitation to all schools and educationalists who want to do something worthwhile.
Yeah, linking us back to this is odd. It strikes me that the fact of this great mental health crisis, which you mentioned in the context of Europe, but which is absolutely sweeping the youth in the U.S. As well, is if we want to take it as evidence or proof that you can't drain meaning out of the equation and still have a flourishing humanity. We are in some way programmed to seek meaning and to rely upon. We're programmed for grand narratives. It would be one maybe a provocative way to put it, and we can't do without them. It's a fact of human psychology, if you like. And if you like, that points to a deeper truth about the world. But you also pointed out, I think rightly, of course, the danger, the tremendous danger in the past that grand narratives have posed for humanity, because they can be turned to all sorts of tribal purposes, and they have enormous power over groups of people to make them do terrible things they otherwise wouldn't do. That's one of the great arguments against organized religion. It takes religion to make good people do bad things, but the riposte to that is that it also takes religion to make bad people do good things. In other words, religion is an incredibly powerful tool for shaping and molding human behavior, and it's something that I think we're learning in this century. In the past century or so, that we can't simply excise it from human life and expect things to go on in a healthy way. So then the challenge then comes back to, well, how do we bring back in a notion of grand narrative without bringing the bathwater back in? How do we bring the baby in without the bathwater? And I mean, we can say a few things that are much easier said than done. One of which is, well, is it possible to think about a grand narrative that is not at the same time a kind of exclusive doctrine or dogma? Can you have grand narrative without dogma? I believe you can. I have no proof that this is the case, but I think it's the need of the time. We have to let go of the dogmatic certainties, but at the same time, we have to have a kind of core sense of belief or conviction that there is meaning in the universe, that it's better to act in a way that aligns oneself with that meaning in all the infinite ways one can do it, in all the infinite ways the different human cultures and religions do this, but that there is a stream, a thread of meaning running through things that somehow we're programmed to seek and to grab onto and to follow. And this has to start, as you also said in your third point, it has to start from a very early age. But then that certainly in secular countries immediately raises the question of, are you talking about religious education for young children? That sounds a little bit suspicious as well. But again, if we can find a way to solve the problem of non-dogmatic grand narrative, then why not? I mean, I grew up in the American school system with a certain grand narrative about freedom and liberty and equality and so forth. That's the American religion. That's a grand narrative, and that's a very powerful one. One that I think it's better to have than not to have. And so I think just citing that as an example, I think it's possible to talk about early education, finding a way to teach the sacredness of everything, of every human being and of the world around us, without making it a tool for division and tribalism and dogmatism.
Just very brief input. Sorry, just a very brief input here. I would think that here, Jerusalem can learn something from Athens, because I think science is a project where, while especially in natural science, you believe in an objective reality that exists, but you're not dogmatic about it. You're always open to learn more about it and to, in fact, let go of your previous partially or totally false theories. And I don't see any reason why this could not be done also in relationship to Jerusalem.
We would need a religious dialogue in public. And that's actually very difficult. So maybe this podcast is an example of trying to do so, but it's actually it's not easy. I know there's a huge difference. Like in Norway, there's more or less no really religious discussion in the public sphere, but maybe a little bit more in Denmark. Actually, it has some strange connection there with the history from in philosophy, like Kierkegaard, Søren Kierkegaard, and also Grundtvig has connected religious and philosophy much more than others. Then maybe they still have this tradition. But I would also say that I don't think we actually have to, like, we have to pull this religious study down on young children, because young children are interested in existential questions. My experience is that they love it, and they think about it a lot, but they don't have the arena to really discuss it. And also in educational studies in school subject, it's so much about information and facts about different religion, and not really. And it's only some religions, because they have made this idea about some global religions, and the largest one, and then these are the only religious positions that they are presenting. So I think that I did philosophy for children for some years,
Mhm.
and P4C, and it was so many questions, and they love it, and they had so much to discuss. And the thing was that they were very logical, and they often came to the same conclusions and the same thoughts around universe or around beginning. And I also tell a story. There was a young boy who was at my cabin, and we were walking down to the boat. This is it's a very special island in the western part of Norway. When there's no one, it's only this cabin and one more on the island. And I was walking, and I was thinking of everything I had to do, because it was only 4 or 5 years, and he was coming with me in down to the boat, and he was not very experienced about it. So I had all these thoughts, and then he suddenly said to me, "Do you know where it all began?" And I was like, "No, what are you talking about?" And he said, "It's Big Bang." And I was like, "Wow, it's Big Bang, yeah." And I think that the view, the horizon of you could see the whole horizon of between the sky and the ocean, and this is it's a very erupted landscape.
Mm.
So, and then I asked him, but what was before the Big Bang?
Mhm.
And then he said, maybe it was the stars and the planets was before the Big Bang. Okay, but what was before the planets then? And then he was silent, and he stopped, and then he looked at me, and okay, maybe that is what they call God. So
Wow.
I think that's you just ask question and see what kind of meaning and what kind of thoughts young children have, and they have a lot of thoughts. And this was a young boy living in the city of Oslo normally. So I think it just proves that it's very simple, and it's very, but maybe also the environment and what we are living at school, we should do something to bring in more nature into school.
Yes, definitely. And more questions and experiences that create an experience of awe. Because you've been talking now, Knut Ove, about control. And yes, I mean, in certain things, it's good to have control. It's good to be able to, create cars that go the direction you want them to go, whatever. But whereas that is practical in many ways, but essentially, I think the greatest experience that a human being can have, and I think all great thinkers have gone for this, and I think especially Einstein used to point out to this, that this experience of awe, of mystery, of how small we are and how grand existence is, or the universe is. This is like the highest achievement of human mind, to be really able to understand the grandeur of it. And I think in school, unfortunately, our educational approach makes everything, as you said, controllable, and everything, like we can put everything under a microscope, as it were. And so we lose this sense of awe and majesty and wonder. So yeah, I think that is something. The other thing that came to my mind is that you were saying it's difficult to get religions to have a dialogue or a conversation, and I think that's really a pity, because I think that there's a lot of science related, well, I don't know if there's a lot, but there's at least some science related research that shows, and I think actually one could say that science as a project itself shows that human beings basically share the same rationality. I mean, regardless of which culture you're born in, the rationality of your mind works in the same way. So it's not like I don't know, Tunisians see the universe completely differently from the French or something like that. So that's why science is a universal and global project, where everybody from any background can come in and understand it and share it, and do it on equal basis. So if there is that sort of a universality in human rationality, what stops us from applying this to matters of spirit or spirituality or religion? And I think the only reason is that our minds have been so programmed to look at things from a very narrow perspective that can create a problem for people from different religious backgrounds to actually have a true dialogue. But I think if we free ourselves from that kind of dogmatism, our minds are built very similarly. So it would be not difficult. And this is, I think, what you're referring to, that children have very much less of these problems because their minds have not yet been programmed to that extent to look at life from these particular perspectives.
Could I just
sorry.
Just a short comment, because it's a very new idea. This idea that rationality should not be something common. As a sensus communis was a normal idea and something that everybody was. And when Kant says that you should dare to think for yourself, that is to use the rationality of all humans. That is to become like everybody else. But it's by dare to think of yourself. So it's a very new idea that we actually, when we dare to think or to mean something, it is something private or something that is it's not a human ability. And so it's a very strange idea, and it's not more than like say 150, maybe just 100 years. I think it really got popular with the language term.
Yeah, that was his definition of enlightenment: dare to know. And I think this idea that Kamran was talking about, bringing science into the picture, when we're talking about the kind of grand narrative the world needs today, which is a narrative of interconnectedness, a narrative that there is that we're all on this journey of the universe waking up, to its own self. I think science has a great deal to add to this narrative as well. We might traditionally think of science as being responsible for pulling the meaning out, pulling the foundations of belief out, and leaving us with this landscape of smoldering ruins of atoms in the void where there's no meaning. But I think equally we can look at some of the great results of our scientific discoveries as feeding into a new kind of grand narrative of consciousness. Just as a couple of concrete examples, and I hesitate to bring it up because it gets I think used and abused a bit too much. But the reality of the world at a microscopic level, beyond microscopic, at the quantum level, is that everything is entangled with everything else. Everything truly is interconnected with everything else in a single system, which we can approximate as separate atoms, separate bodies. And oftentimes, most of the time, that approximation is extremely good. But we make the mistake of taking that approximation to be the reality. But that's not what the underlying science says. The underlying science is that everything truly is interconnected with everything else. So there are ways in which the facts of the matter are supportive of the kind of grand narrative which we could truly call spiritual that the world needs. But even beyond that, on a sort of higher level, the reason I got into astrophysics and ended up studying cosmology for my PhD was, as a child, I was absolutely enthralled by pictures of galaxies, and by Carl Sagan's almost religious awe that he spoke about the cosmos with. It resonated. It struck such a deep chord within me. It struck me as being so fundamentally true and right. And in the opening sentences of Cosmos, in the first episode, he says, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." And spoken from a purely materialistic scientific perspective, that statement has such amazing spiritual resonances. I mean, that's a summation of the new grand narrative for humanity, which is also a spiritual grand narrative, that we're a way for the cosmos to know itself. The cosmos is this continual process of waking up, and and the more we understand it, both in the macroscopic sense of the beauty of stars and galaxies and this grand symphony of the universe, as well as in the microscopic domain, just looking at the mechanics of how cells work, how ATP is manufactured inside the mitochondria. There's amazing animations of this you can find on YouTube, both on the macro and the micro scale. The more you know about the world, in terms of how it really works, the more filled, I think, with almost religious awe and wonder you are, a sense of wonder at being alive, and a sense of the preciousness of life, and the preciousness of the civilization that occupies this tiny sliver of habitable surface of this planet. Carl Sagan also beautifully spoke about that towards the end of his life, when he had the Voyager satellite turn around and take a last picture of Earth, and it was this mote of dust. It was a speck of light, suspended in a sunbeam, he says. I think that that our scientific understanding of the world absolutely is partners with, and should not be seen as the source of this draining out of meaning in the modern world.
I really like it. I like the whole story, and I think we have to try also to discover different kinds of science and different kinds of knowledge, and what knowledge is, to be able to understand what kind of knowledge that really helps us and to gives us closer connection to nature and to the universe then, and what kind of knowledge that actually brings us, removes us from reality and removes us from existence. In school nowadays, they often talk about they should learn to learn, or they should. They are always told that there are certain abilities they are to learn, but they don't really learn what is. I mean, they don't have a content, and I think that's very difficult for them. And I think maybe that could be some of the problem. If we should understand Carl Sagan, or we need to understand what really is, and what is the nature of what is.
Very good point. Yeah, this is, I mean, here we see, I think every time we try to separate such fundamental aspects of reality and life, such as Athens and Jerusalem, but even like, processes and content, then things go bad, because as now has been repeatedly pointed out, existence is an integrated entity, and if you artificially pull it apart, especially if you pull it apart so that you really believe that it comes in parts and is not integrated, then you really go wrong, and you cannot experience existence the way that it is optimally sort of devised to be experienced. So yeah, I think that you've got a very good point here, Knut Ove, about how should we think about education in schools so that we can bring these elements together.
I think there's a nice way of ending this episode with another question of combining something. But I think that's one of the main, maybe one of the essence of the whole podcast. Even though we see different aspects and different, but we try to combine it, and I think that's something we should do more of in life in general. So thank you for listening to us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You have been listening to Athens and Jerusalem, created by Cameron Namdar, Stephen Phelps, and Knut Ove Essay. Nora Juel is the broadcast voice and technical support. Music is pieces of Edvard Grieg's Morning Mood. The voices in the intro are Viktor Frankl, interview with Robert Oppenheimer and Pope John Paul II. Thank you for listening, and please check out another episode.